Back in late 2000, I was in my early 20s and living happily for a few years as a broke expat in Berlin. One of my roommate who was from UK and I were out late seeing a band play, maybe around midnight or 1 a.m. And afterwards we were headed home, walking through a relatively central but quiet part of the city towards a subway station entrance. We were in high spirits after a couple drinks and a fun night out. Not too drink, just a little tipsy. And we were laughing and chatting, probably somewhat loudly, as we headed arms in arms toward the subway entrance, which was ahead of us down at the far end of a long, quiet street. It was late October, early November, and still warm enough for it to feel nice to walk outside. And as the misty air hung in yellow halls under the streetlights, just as the little gust of wind blew some leaves across the pavement in front of us, we both become aware of a figure walking ahead of us in the mist. From the back, it appeared to be an older woman, stooped over, carrying bags in each hand and walking with a very pronounced limbs, sort of dragging on her legs, along behind her. We were speaking English and nearly about to pass her on the sidewalk when a woman cried over rather exaggeratedly in English, but with the thick German accent, "Oh, help! Won't somebody help me?" She did not sound frightened or worried so much as deeply demanding, and her own tone of voice suggested she expected to be helped. My roommate tried to keep us moving ahead past her, but I softened and slowed down my pace because, after all, this was an elderly woman carrying bags late at night, and she clearly could not walk very well. I asked her what she needed help with, and she said, "It's my leg. Help me carry the bags. I live just over there." And she nodded towards the apartment building entryway a half a block up the street. My inner good Samaritan instinct kicked in and I responded automatically. "Oh, of course," decidedly less enthused for some reason, but burgundyingly followed me as we each grabbed one of the woman's bag and carted them to the doorstep up the street. As the woman's face came into a sharper relief underneath a nearby street light, I realized that she looked exactly like a witch out of German fairy tale. Bent posture, wart on her nose, grayish white straggly hair, and she was wearing dark wool clothing with a hood. I was honestly taken aback by her appearance and nearly gasped out loudly, but again, wanting to be polite, I pushed this to the back of my mind. Who cares what she looks like? I told myself. She's just an elderly lady who needs our help. When we arrived at her building's doorstep, the entryway door was surprisingly ajar, not the norm at all the neighborhood we were in, and she pushed it open easily, suddenly seeming to possess more strength than she had had moment before, and leaned forward to hold it for open me so that I could go in first and she would be behind me. She gestured up a dark and dingling flight of stairs and breathed, "Just up the stairs, just up the stairs." I froze in my tracks for a second in the doorway as my tipsy 23-year-old brain tried to puzzle it out. Logically, the polite thing to do would be carry the bag up the stairs for this woman, right? But then again, all the hairs were standing up on the back of my neck, and the building's hallway and the narrow staircase in the dim fluorescent yellow light looked awfully foreboding. I could just make out a doorway at the top of the stairs on the right hand side. That was also slightly ajar, leading into an apartment. An air of intensely stale, musty smoke wafted down the stairs. And then there was the tone of stark urgency in the woman's voice as she urged me to step fully inside and get up the stair as quickly as possible. If I had to describe her tone, it was not too far from the voice of a cartoon villain, rubbing their hands together while hatching a nefarious plan. As I stood in the entryway, tipsily trying to weigh the very bad feeling in the pit of my stomach against my lifelong fear of being polite, I actually giggled at how absurdly horror movie sequence the moment felt. So much so that it could not be a real threat, right? It was too spot on. So I must be imagining it. Fortunately, my roommate, who had seen more shit in her life than I had at that point, literally yelled out, "Oh hell no!" hooked her arm into mine, and pulled me out the door and down the street as quickly as possible. The old woman yelled disappointedly after us as my roommate dragged me across the street and down the subway stairs, back into the safety of a warm, brightly lit public space full of people. Once we had safely escaped, my roommate shared the two things that had set off definitive alarm bells in her head. She was certain that the woman limbs wasn't there initially as she walked ahead of us, and that it had only appeared as we get closer to her. And second one, in her words, as you stood into the doorway, I suddenly knew that she was a creepy adult son waiting for us at the top of the stair who was going to chain you to her bed. Perhaps it was just our fanciful imagination, but I have always felt grateful to my roommate's instinct for keeping us away from whatever was at the top of those stairs.